for meeting with us virtually and to help us assist in moving forward with this task force. And hopefully today or in the very near future, we can get moving to the AF&P committee meeting, which I think is the 26th of May. And I think Matt is our caller that we haven't identified, Matt Chasen. So I don't actually see a list of names, but I'll assume that that's our caller since I got a text. So I did hear back from 2 union groups, and I don't know if you want me to share right away what the 2 groups mentioned, or if people would prefer to enter into some discussion about the report or anything else first. I can let the group decide, otherwise I'm happy to share.
If I could ask, I think we mentioned kind of our position to you, Leah, but I think that for the task force to make a recommendation coming out of this meeting, it's important to understand what administration's position will be on either of those 2, what the board members believe the board could support of those 2 options, and I'd like to hear what accountability and efficiency would say, because obviously any recommendation that goes forward to the AFP will then meet potentially with opposition or support from administration and from board members. So I think that would be crucial to the task force really putting its weight behind one of those 2 alternatives.
Okay, anybody else want to say something first? Okay, I'll take silence as a no. I can only see like one person at a time. So just real quickly, from the point of view from administration, when we became a part of this task force, we saw ourselves as neutral facilitators of the process. And we will be bringing forward this item with whatever the recommendation or recommendations are from this committee. So that's the role that we see ourselves playing. We were not going to be weighing in on the pros and cons of the recommendations. So that's the answer from administration. I believe Matt's on the call, and then obviously the 2 board directors can speak to their points of view.
Well, I can, I'm not speaking for the board, I'm speaking as a board member, but I have to look at what is on the table and try to make some sort of a assessment of that. And I'm more than happy to give my opinions once we look at the options. I don't know what else to do. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm not sure what else I can possibly do at this point. I mean, we've talked up to this point, even though we've had a huge break, we've talked about a lot of things.
I'll speak next, I guess. I know that a lot of work has gone into looking at different options. So I would, from my end, I would support what the task force recommends. I think we need to move forward with that. I feel like just all of these bargaining groups have been through a lot recently, and I feel like we've given a lot of careful consideration. So I would support what the task force recommends.
Okay, so I'm not sure if Matt is on or not. However, I will just tell you that 2 groups did get back to me, and I'll start with the point that seems to be the constant. The 70% of sick leave seems to be the one area that I am calling our non-negotiable, although technically we're here to talk about everything as a task force, but the 70% sick leave, which is a reduction from the 90% that we currently have in place, is the one area that neither unit wanted to move away from. So that was the most constant. For both groups, they felt that there might be some compromise areas with the age of 55 or 57, but nothing higher than an age of 57. And then also some possible room for discussion and compromise on the 15 years of service or the 20 years of service. One group felt a little more strongly towards 55 in their unit, but more open to 20. So those are the two areas, is the age and the years of service, that I think are the most ripe for discussion. It seemed to me that neither group really saw a move from the 70%, and in fact one group felt that that was the highest number that they could accept. So I would open it up now to other people to kind of talk about their feelings, especially on the 55, 57 years of age and the 15 and 20 years of service.
Leah, I guess I would just say that, we didn't respond back to it all, just I guess because the last meeting we did have, I thought it was pretty well understood that that 70% was the number that all the groups were looking for. When we got the numbers back, I thought we did settle on 55 and 20, but we got 57, 20, and 70%, which it's kind of, the two numbers that we did get, well, I guess we could just figure it'd be somewhere in the middle with that being said. But we didn't have really any questions about the report. That's why I guess I didn't get back to you. But I would agree with what you just said and what the other two groups had mentioned as well. So I guess that's where we're at for right now. Not much other discussion to be had for us right now.
Thank you. And just yep.
No, go ahead, Leah.
No, but I was just letting people know that that was for Local 420, who represents the school engineers. And like I said, nobody was obligated to get back to me, but I was just kind of looking for a little info. So I'll let Catherine from PAMS go ahead.
Mm-hmm. So it was very clear with my unit that, like you mentioned, the sick time was more of a non-negotiable for several reasons. And it sounds like I don't even have to go into those reasons, because we all understand that, like, especially now when people are sick, they really need to use their sick time and not go in. However, I will say that 55 was a larger issue than maybe what I would have expected. I got a lot of feedback from the members talking about many people, because they were hired at a time when it was 55 was the age for retirement, they had always planned for that. Now, of course, we can't help illnesses and things that happen, but 55 was very important to our members, although I still stand behind that not everybody who wants to retire at 55 is able to. So if we have that as the age, many people will still opt to work, but they would have that option. So, and I know, Leah, thank you for reading our response and for considering that, but we obviously are hoping more for the 55 versus the 57. When it comes to expense and negotiating, I think the first thing that PAMS would want to look at would be raising from 15 years of experience to 20 years. That would be something we could probably talk about, that we could bring back to our members, but the age was very important to most of our members, keeping it at 55.
And if I might, from MTEA, I guess it's no secret, alternative B has been the standing demand of MTEA for some time now. It's past contractual standard. So I guess I'm sorry, I guess I'm just a little incredulous that administration has no position, because they're like, if you're telling me that administration's not going to oppose alternative B when it goes to the board, or give an answer that there's like cost associated. I mean, there's a difference in price between B and A. And we think that that's understandable and it's okay. We think that people who work all their careers should be able to retire with dignity at a reasonable age. But, I guess what we're looking for is before MTEA would consider, a compromise to our position for a task force recommendation. I think we were just, is there no guidance? Like if a board member were to ask on the board floor in later this month, well, can we afford it? I guess I'd just not like to be blindsided by an administration saying, well, we had no position, but yeah, we can't afford it. Or Matt Chasen, who's on the call, saying from the Accountability and Efficiency Office, we don't recommend this option. I think that that's crucial for the various members of this task force to be able to make a reasonable recommendation, because otherwise I think it's alternative B from what everyone's saying. But I guess that alternative A is on the table, and we'd like to hear what varying levels of support we could expect for either one of those alternatives when it hits the board floor.
Hey, can you guys hear me now? This is Matt Chasen speaking.
Yes,
thanks, Ben. Hey, thanks for including me in here. Sorry that I'm late to the conversation. And to your point, Ben, the position the OAE has on this item is really just, I see two sort of hard constraints that I think whatever recommendation comes forward need to be met. The first is simply just a total transparency on what the cost is going to be. And I think I was not party to some of the other earlier conversations. I don't know if there's any debate about what the actuary said in terms of like, no, it's not going to cost that much, or no, that seems to be in line with what actuarial science might predict. But then secondly, we would just want to make sure that, and again, I'm late to the party on this one, one of the soft constraints I see in this conversation is just that the dollars that we allocate to this benefit is one, obviously, that we can't spend on an employee group that was hired after 2013. I don't know how much conversation's gone on about that. I'm not saying that to be a deal breaker here, but I know that as the district examines a lot of things through an equity lens, the allocation of this fund here, to your point, if it's expensive to a point, that removes that dollar from being eligible for that other employee group. So I'm not sure how much the group had conversed on that or not.
Hello, this is Leah again. So I do believe at an earlier meeting, there was a lot of conversation around this cutoff date, mostly because there are these groups of people in the district that entered the district under contract. And at the time that they entered the district, this was considered the benefits that were going to be available to them. And obviously they were a very forward, looking benefit over the course of possibly decades for someone to be in the district. And what I remember from our in-person task force meetings was a common theme across the room of a promise being broken, and something that had been promised that might have really played a factor in someone's decision making is now been removed to them. Whereas for people who are hired after that 2013 date, weren't ever hired with that expectation. If they were to get it, it would be a bonus now, but they were never hired with that expectation, and it likely wasn't something that was a determining factor maybe in their choice to come here or not. I'm not sure if any other district is offering it for people after post-contract. I don't believe so, but that's my recollection. Other people can tell me if they recall differently, but I feel like I have that in my notes. And then also, if Martha is still on the line, She would be better able to discuss the financial impact on if we can afford it or not. But during the original creation of the task force, I was told that we would be bringing this forward for the board to make a decision, and that we weren't going to be negative or positive necessarily to anything being brought forward by the task force. That the budget, kind of is what it is, and that we would have to look at, is this a priority for the board to move forward on, and if so, then there comes the look for funding. But Martha's probably better able to speak to that if I misspoke.
Hello, this is Martha Kreitzman, and I need to see more about the two versions A and B of what we're deciding here, because this is the first task force meeting I've been part of. And from what I understand about Matt's question, we are looking at the staff that was hired prior to 2013. And I think at this point that would be important. And I'd look forward to getting more information on both of the options. It seems that having 20 years experience would probably be an important thing as far as keeping costs down.
Yeah, I guess.
Martha, the email that I sent out looking to schedule this meeting included the attachment of the GRS report from the actuaries, and page 3 kind of has a spreadsheet breakdown. And then I also attached it into the calendar invite, just so if that's the place people had easier access to than going through their email, it was there. So they have the baseline as 60, 20, 90, alternative A as age 57, 20 years of service and 70% sick leave, and alternative B as 55, 15, and 70. And it shows that the increase in the actual actuarial liability goes up by 68 million for A, which is 57 and 20 years, and it goes up by 95 million for alternative B, which is 55 and 15. And the PAYGO contributions would be 57 million a year for the baseline of the 60, 20, 90, 60 million.79 for A, which is the 57, 20, and 70, and then 64.16 million for alternative B for the 55, 15, and 70. So pages 1 through 3 are kind of pages 1 through 4 are the summary, and then following behind are the various tables that they use to kind of create those summary documents. And I think Matt had another question that I failed to answer before. I don't think anyone was specifically looking to discuss the report itself, but just the general feasibility of being able to move forward.
Well, then, Ben, to your earlier question about does anyone want to take a position on this, what we would simply say is that depending on the scenario, again, as long as we're transparent with costs, and we'd want to make sure that that gets packaged with this recommendation in this specific form, that there's an updated 5-year forecast, and that be accompanied also by these actuarial schedules. And that just allows the board and the public with full transparency to say, yep, this is the cost, this is the short to medium impact, and then this is the long term. One of the other hard constraints we have to operate within is that the board is actually prohibited from expanding and enhancing any OPEB benefit until the unfunded actual liability is less than 100 million. Now we're at 735 million today. Now, I don't say that to be obstructionist. I only say that because I think one of the constraints of this recommendation is that we have to learn how to satisfy that and navigate that in moving forward. So I've sort of alluded to what I think is one of the parameters we need in a recommendation, which is just that what the board typically sees, which is a 5-year forecast and the OPEB valuation. They usually see that on 2 separate dates, and so it's hard to see the whole picture. We'll bring those together with this recommendation. And like I said, no one can say that there wasn't full transparency on cost and what the impact both short and long term would be then. Now, to satisfy that second constraint, I think we have to be a little bit more deliberate. Specifically, I think that the board would have to direct the administration to do 2 things. The first is that they would have to amend the FY21 proposed budget to fund the OPEB trust to match the actuarially assumed pre-funding objective. Now, dropping the financial speak, it simply means that the FY21 proposed budget has to have as its baseline the expected actual medical claims costs plus 5% if we go with scenario baseline or A, or plus 5.6% and change if we go with scenario B. That keeps us on a fully funded track. And secondly, the board, as part of its recommendation, would have to say that we implement and introduce a new permanent budget parameter. And that would read that preparation of the budget shall be consistent with actuarial schedules to fully fund its OPEB obligation by 2037. Now, again, the reason I say that is because the board right now is prohibited from expanding anything until it's under 100 million. I think if you introduce these directives to the administration, it would allow you to move forward with either of the scenarios and allow you to get around sort of that prohibition of the expansion. One could make the argument that as long as we maintain that fully fund date, which is right now projected to be 2037, then we're meeting that obligation.
Anyone else have any questions right away or any comments?
Again, I think it's kind of silly to pretend that this task force is going to make a recommendation on either A or B without understanding the viability of its path forward to final passage at the board. So I think Matt's information is very useful, but it doesn't sound like the administration has considered what A and B will look like in an amended budget yet. And I think that would be important to the task force's consideration of a recommendation.
Hello, this is Martha Kreitzman. That is correct. It's not worked into the proposed budget for next year. And I'm not sure when these implications would hit, if it's the following year, 22, or if it would be in fiscal year 21. I guess I'd have to understand more of that. And it's hard to know because we don't know how many people would actually take us up on this.
Okay, so I think we will have to regroup with budget on the handout that we provided to everyone. So it does provide estimates as to what they see the possible usage being based on kind of current usage and past usage of the different timeframes that we've had before. And so in order to maybe respect the task force time, my thought that I'm going to throw out there is that we work with the budget team to look at the first, the possibility of alternative B, since that does seem to be the preferred mixture of qualifications from all of the input that we received, and work to see what that looks like as a current FY21 budget implementation, and then send that back out to the group as soon as we can. And then I'm not sure if anyone has a backup for us. Alternative A was 57, 20, and 70. I don't know if that's going too far, or if the group had a different look, if they preferred 55, 20, and 70 as our alternate A, or just leave it as it is for the time being, for us to bring back a 5-year plan that Matt mentioned, and the options we have inside the FY21 budget to make it happen.
Leah, this is Director Miller. I'm a little, okay, I want to be clear, because if it's 70, 55, and 20, it's different than either alternative A or alternative B. So it's a hybrid that falls in between the two. And I know there were different opinions. PAMPS wants 55, 70, 20. But I mean, how do we account for a possible third alternative, I guess is what I'm saying, or is that not necessary?
So my hope was that because GRS already did a bulk of this work, that they could possibly get us a 55, 20, and 70. However, if the group really just wants to look at the feasibility of the 55, 15, and 70, we can stick with that and bring back the 5-year plan and the possible budget implementation for FY21. Just trying to make sure that we don't bring forward an alternative that is necessarily completely off the table. But this was a good starting point for us to kind of have a basic idea of numbers.
Okay, if I could, I agree. That makes a lot of sense. And I don't know. So I'm hearing that you're suggesting possibly going back to the actuaries to get a few more details that they should have at their fingertips. I don't know if fingertips and actuaries goes hand in hand, but they should.
Yeah, so that's a figurative fingertips, but they do have our bulk data already that they've sorted through and looked through, and a lot of the things that come into play on determining these numbers are already set. So if the feel of the group really is that 55, 15, and 70 is our number one, but our number two is really not 57, 20, and 70, then I would prefer to hopefully see how long it would take GRS to give us back 55, 20, and 70 as a possible other option, but we could just stick with the one as well.
2 points, and then I'll be quiet. But I would like to see that if it's possible, 55, 20, and 70. On another point that Chief Kreitzman put forward, whether this is for next year or starts the following year. If it doesn't start next year, then I want to extend the present policy to next year, because there are people waiting in the wings right now that thought that they were going to have a certain accessibility to retirement, and I don't want to let those folks down. So I'm a little bit confused about why it would start not in the fall, but not in the fall semester year, but in the following year. So I need clarity on that at some point.
So I do believe that this was prepared with the idea that it would be starting in fiscal year 21. because the current early retirement window is closing. Obviously, like you said, there are always options for us to take, but the intent was that we were taking this to the board as soon as we can for implementation starting in FY21.
Thank you.
I'll chime in if no one else is wanting to speak at the moment. There's a couple of bookends between both scenarios, which was the intent, and as long as we are all together, I might as well give those to you. If we do nothing and we just stick with our baseline, the total cost for us to reach a fully funded status, which is the current baseline, which is in 2037, that's $1.1 billion worth of expense over the next 17 years. If we go with scenario A, that's a $1.2 billion expense over the next 17 years. So the difference between baseline and scenario A over 17 years is $87 million. And if you divide that out to get an average, which is not entirely accurate, but for the points of conversation, it's about $5 million extra a year in order to get from your baseline to your scenario A. If we look at scenario B, we'd be looking at almost $1.3 billion over the next 17 years, which is an extra $170 million on top of the regular baseline cost we would have anyway. If you divide that out over 17 years, looking at about $10 million additional cost per year on top of what we would do right now anyway. So that gives you some bookends about where something in the middle might land, but also gives you a very rough estimate as the additional cost per year on top of what we already have projected going forward.
Yeah, again, I just think it's as critical to the consideration for our union, and I'm sure for the other unions. I'm sure I'm not speaking out of us off base here, to hear what the plan, because if there's an alternative C that's midway in between A and B, which I think is what Matt's getting at, the understanding what's the plan to put A into the budget for next year this month, because that has to happen. That has been our union's understanding, is that this task force has a deadline essentially to meet, because there's a lot of people who want to know what the deal is with their retirement now that there's no early retirement window any longer. I think before we throw just another alternative in the mix, which sounds like it is most viable to all the groups present, but what's the plan to put A in the budget? What would be the plan to put C in the budget? And then what could be fit in this budget? Understanding that there will be increasing we are only in a first year of an increase in funding to the district with the referendum having been passed, and that there is an increasing amount of money in future years for that referendum. Before I think fourth year it is fully, the district gets all 87 million permanently. So I think it's important. It sounds like Chief Kreitzman needs a little more time to look at this and consider how it would fit with budget potentially, because again, I think if money were no object, we will support option A, alternative B. I'm sure everyone will support alternative B if money is no object. So I don't expect, based on the number of board meetings I've been to, that would be how it would play out at a board meeting though. So I think we would like to make a fully informed recommendation as a task force member. We would like to hear a little more guidance from Chief Kreitzman at a next meeting before we get to the AFP meeting 2 weeks from tomorrow.
If I could intervene for a second, I would suggest, I know this, Ms. Kreisman, I know this is really putting a lot of pressure on the administration, but this committee was supposed to have met and had recommendations before the budget. And so it was supposed to already be in the budget. And then, of course, the pandemic occurred. So it's put us in a very difficult position. I'm wondering if is it possible if we could meet. I'd like us to know about this before the public hearing on the 19th, so that people could address it. I don't know if that's possible for us for the administration to come back before the 19th, which is next week, and for us, say, to meet on Monday of next week and have some discussion. I mean, I'm asking for a real rush on this, but I don't know if that's possible.
We are going to ask the actuaries for the other option very quickly. So we'll let you know as soon as we know on what their estimated time frame is, and we'll tell them we need it before that date.
Is it possible that we could meet next Monday and have a discussion, and the administration could be back to us with their thinking?
I think that would be important. This is Martha.
Okay, so I think that was a confirmation from Martha that we should meet on Monday, and that we can meet on Monday with information. As soon as we have information coming in, I'll send it out via email to the group. So if something is ready before the other, we'll just stay in communication via email and get everything out to everyone. And I will send out another email just verifying times with everyone for a meeting next Monday, the 18th.
If I can put oh, I'm sorry, were you going to speak, Martha?
No, I was just going to say thank you.
Your phone moved, Martha. As a final thought, Ben, you had raised the concern too, which is, I think, entirely understandable. You know, what is the position of accountability when this item comes forward? Basically, we're landing with, as long as the fully fund date doesn't move, we can, if not support, we don't have to necessarily raise an objection to this approach forward. And as long as that's met by 2037, which is the current projection, you know, that's our position on that. So you have that transparency from us.
Okay, last messages from anybody? Any final thoughts? Otherwise, you'll just all be keeping your eyes peeled to your email for information and the calendar appointment, but we won't close out yet in case somebody wants to provide a little bit more information.
I guess I would just like to ask that administration, you know, has an opinion or takes a position before we go to the full board.
Yep, Martha and I will, and the team will regroup with Dr. Posley. I think originally, since this was a task force created by the board, because the board wanted to have input from this membership on this item, we were trying to stay as facilitators on it and not try to somehow unduly influence the committee. But we will regroup with him and with Martha and the numbers, and we will look at the feasibility that we see in the FY21 budget and bring that information to the next meeting, if not before, via email.
Thank you. So Director Simpson, I see them having a position by next Monday. That's what I hope for. I understand giving them until the full board, but I really think we need to be able to discuss it next in a week. Thanks, Leah. This is helpful.
I just want to thank everybody again for the opportunity. It's always great to see all of you, and I appreciate the task force.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to leave now.
Okay, I think Catherine is speaking for all of us, that we're thankful for the opportunity, and we will be seeing and or hearing each other soon next week, Monday. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.